Cumberland County was the first county in North Carolina to establish a child abuse prevention plan. A lot of conversation in the state about ACE, adverse childhood experiences. But what does that mean? Elizabeth, let me start with you. You're working in schools. What are people referring to in schools when they talk about ACE?
So there is the original ACEs study and questionnaire that asked about 10 different types of specific adverse childhood experiences, ranging from different types of abuse and neglect to different things that could be happening in the household. And I would say most of those are still, even though that study was done nearly over 20 years ago, are still the same things that teachers and families are talking about in our schools today. Lots of different types of abuse and neglect. I would say one of the bigger ones that comes up oftentimes in schools is caregiver incarceration, other things happening in the home, caregiver substance abuse, domestic violence. So those are some of the most common ones that we hear, but also some of the newer ones with different systemic issues and racism. And then of course the natural disasters, the more those are happening, the devastation that that's causing to different parts of the state just adds to other levels of trauma and ACEs that families are experiencing that we hear about most in the school setting.
And of course, Betsey, brain science is helping us understand the implications of these ACEs. Interesting that we've sort of broadened our definition from traditional abuse and neglect to other contextual environmental issues that are affecting kids. Can you just talk a little bit about how we're capturing this new brain science in the way that we think about ACEs?
Yeah, and I think that's a really important piece, is really thinking about this brain science of it. And as Elizabeth was saying, there are these two buckets. There's the abuse, sexual, emotional, or physical abuse, and then there's that household dysfunction bucket. So that's living with a parent with mental illness, living with a parent with a substance use disorder. We think about we're in the throes of an opioid epidemic and thinking about those children with those parents struggling with opioid use. And so parental separation. So that second bucket, that household dysfunction bucket, probably is more common than the true severe abuse and neglect. But when we think about when children are in that environment, in that experiencing, having this disruption of the family, having that chaos without a safe harbor, what happens then is that cortisol is the stress level, the stress hormone, and you have this, you're on high alert, you're having this cortisol released all the time in response to this really stressful environment. That cortisol then affects your brain, affects the way that your brain is growing, affects the way that your brain is functioning. And so when we talk about toxic stress as this, that is that cortisol hormone affecting the way that our brain is functioning in response to these really stressful, sustained environments. And that appreciation of that brain science and how it's affecting our children's developing brain is really important, and an element of this I think people are really starting to appreciate more.
So Sharon, as you're working with communities, how in the world are you explaining all of that to community stakeholders so that they understand what they're dealing with?
Well, we're really fortunate. There's a documentary film called Resilience, and we're using that to screen the film for big community audiences to help them understand the Adverse Childhood Experiences study. We love the film. It's an hour long, and the subtitle of it is The Biology of Stress and the Science of Hope. And it not only shares what the Adverse Childhood Experiences study is, it really inspires folks after they finish watching the film to do something. And that really is helping to catalyze communities coming together to talk about this.
And of course, do something is what we're all about here. Thank you.